The 1970s were a time of bold trends, from disco music to bell-bottom jeans, and that spirit extended to what Americans put on their dinner tables. Home cooks explored everything from casseroles packed with condensed soups to bright, jiggly gelatin creations that doubled as eye-catching centerpieces. Yet, as society moved forward, embracing healthier eating, fresh ingredients, and global flavors, many of these once beloved dishes quietly slipped out of the spotlight. Families started paying attention to nutrition labels, new cooking techniques rose in popularity, and convenience foods morphed into something far beyond their 1970s forms. What happened to those iconic meals that so many people grew up with? Number 1. Meatloaf with tomato soup topping. Many families in the 1970s regularly served a classic meatloaf that relied on canned tomato soup as a convenient glaze. Spreading a can of condensed soup over the top offered moisture and a subtle sweetness, and it also cut down on extra prep time for busy parents. Our look at more than 100 period cookbooks and cooking magazines shows that this version of meatloaf was considered cost-effective and kid-friendly, especially for baby boomers juggling work and household duties. Although meatloaf had been around for decades, its roots trace back to thrifty cooking methods from the 1930s and 1940s. This specific soup-topped variety took off during the economic pressures of the early to mid-70s. Advertisements in newspapers frequently suggested pairing it with mashed potatoes and canned vegetables, creating a full dinner that fit the family budget. However, it began to disappear from mainstream popularity once people realized the high sodium and preservative levels in many canned soups, prompting a wider turn toward fresher sauces and homemade gravies in the 1980s. A growing health consciousness led families to question processed foods, and home cooks discovered more appealing meatloaf variations that used diced tomatoes, fresh herbs, or even barbecue sauce. By the time Gen X entered adulthood, the tomato soup glaze felt too retro, associated with old commercials and times gone by. Restaurants rarely featured it, opting instead for more modernized versions or abandoning meatloaf altogether. Over time, this dish slipped into the realm of nostalgia and family memory, occasionally mentioned in old photo albums or revived at throwback potlucks, but no longer a go-to recipe in contemporary households. Number 2. Chicken cordon bleu. During the 1970s, chicken cordon bleu was a sign of culinary sophistication at many suburban dinner parties. Featuring chicken breasts stuffed with ham and Swiss cheese, then breaded and baked or pan-fried, it seemed elegant yet manageable for home cooks. Vintage cooking shows and glossy women's magazines praised it as the perfect way to bring a bit of French flair to the American kitchen. Our extensive scan of internet archives, including several cooking forums that reference 1970s nostalgia, reveals that many hosts prided themselves on presenting this golden brown, cheese-filled entree, alongside sides like buttered peas or parsley potatoes. Its popularity rested on the belief that it was a restaurant-quality meal that could be replicated at home without too many complicated steps. However, as the 1980s approached, more people started choosing leaner meals, embracing grilled chicken and steamed vegetables to reduce fat intake. Chicken cordon bleu, with its buttery breading and melted cheese, fell out of favor as diet trends like low-fat, low-cholesterol cooking gained steam. Restaurants that once proudly listed chicken cordon bleu on their menus began replacing it with lighter or more international offerings, reflecting the newfound American fascination with global flavors, such as Japanese sushi or Mediterranean-style fish. Busy families also discovered quick-fix options like microwave dinners and fast food chicken sandwiches, which felt more convenient than assembling a stuffed chicken dish from scratch. Though you can still find chicken cordon bleu in some frozen food aisles or on certain catering menus, its position as a coveted 1970s dinner has declined significantly. Even modern cookbooks rarely spotlight it, preferring updated dishes that resonate with contemporary tastes for fresh herbs, zesty marinades, and less reliance on cream or cheese fillings. Number 3. Glazed pineapple ham. The image of a large ham studded with pineapple rings and maraschino cherries is deeply tied to mid-century American gatherings, and the 1970s extended that tradition. Sliced pineapples caramelized in brown sugar or honey made this ham the festive centerpiece of celebrations, from holiday feasts to Sunday dinners. Magazines from that era often ran colorful ads for ham producers, encouraging home cooks to delight family members with this sweet and savory showstopper. Many baby boomers grew up watching their parents whip up this entree for Easter or Christmas, sometimes accompanied by sweet potato casserole and green bean almondine. Despite its nostalgic charm, the glazed pineapple ham lost momentum in the 1980s and beyond for several reasons. Families started to experiment with alternative holiday main dishes, like turkey or roast beef, reflecting the shift away from heavy, sugary sauces. Health advisories related to processed meats and the link to higher sodium and nitrates also gave some consumers pause. We consulted a variety of archived dietitian publications that highlighted the drawbacks of processed ham products around that time. Another factor was changing taste preferences. Younger generations found the pineapple ham combination overly sweet, especially when paired with artificially colored maraschino cherries. The elaborately garnished ham ended up being viewed as outdated, associated with old postcards or old Hollywood dinner scenes. As the 20th century moved toward more sophisticated and globally influenced flavors, a large fruit-decorated ham became an occasional novelty rather than a frequent go-to meal. Many households now prefer spiral-cut hams with simpler glazes or even skip ham altogether. The pineapple-studded version survives mostly in nostalgic references and vintage cookbooks that remind people of the golden age of kitsch entertaining. Number 4, Hamburger Helper as a dinner mainstay. Launched in the early 1970s, Hamburger Helper promised a quick and convenient solution for turning ground beef into a complete meal. The concept appealed especially to working parents who wanted to avoid complicated recipes after a long day. Advertisements during primetime TV shows, including popular 1970s sitcoms, demonstrated how to brown some hamburger, stir in the helper mix, and end up with a creamy or cheesy dinner that the whole family could enjoy. Our review of numerous American nostalgia forums shows that baby boomers often mention Hamburger Helper as a staple from their childhoods. It represented a shift toward heavily processed convenience foods that minimized the need for fresh produce or spices. However, by the 1990s and beyond, families became more aware of the high levels of sodium, artificial flavors, and preservatives in boxed dinner kits. Books on health and nutrition, plus the growing number of fitness-focused TV segments, highlighted the drawbacks of relying too heavily on packaged meals. A new interest in home cooking with fresher ingredients made Hamburger Helper seem outdated. Younger consumers were exposed to a broader range of cultural dishes, making them less inclined to use a one-size-fits-all flavor packet. By the time Gen X started raising their own kids, they often opted for quick homemade meals involving vegetables and lighter sauces. Fast food restaurants also provided stiff competition, as it became just as convenient to grab takeout than to cook from a box. While Hamburger Helper still exists on grocery shelves, it's no longer the weeknight hero it was in the 1970s. Many people now consider it more of a nostalgic memory than a staple dinner, reflecting a shift toward fresh, customizable cooking in modern American kitchens. Number 5. Liver and onions. This protein-packed dish was once viewed as an iron-rich dinner that families could enjoy without spending too much money. World War II-era rationing had already made organ meats common in some households, and the tradition carried into the 1970s for budget-conscious families looking to feed multiple children. Baby boomers remember seeing liver and onions served alongside potatoes or other vegetables, often smothered in gravy to mask the strong flavor. A dive into archived newspaper recipes and televised cooking segments from the 1960s and 1970s shows how nutrition experts touted liver's high vitamin A and B vitamin content. However, changes in dietary guidelines and concerns about cholesterol contributed to the decline of organ meats in general. By the 1980s, medical recommendations began focusing on limiting cholesterol-heavy foods, and liver was seen as a prime example of what to reduce or avoid. The distinctive taste and texture also didn't appeal to younger palates, especially as kids sampled more varied foods thanks to the expanding availability of international cuisine. Many in Gen X avoided liver entirely when they grew up, recalling unpleasant childhood dinner battles. Supermarkets gradually reduced their selection of organ meats because sales declined, and recipes in mainstream cookbooks shifted away from items like liver toward leaner cuts. As a result, liver and onions became far less common. Although it can still be found on some diner menus or in certain cultural recipes, it no longer stands out as a typical American dinner. Instead, it lives on in the memories of older adults who recall it as both a frugal necessity and a once recommended health food that eventually fell out of sync with modern tastes and medical advice. Number 6. Stuffed bell peppers. In the 1970s, many home cooks viewed stuffed bell peppers as an easy way to stretch ground meat and rice into a hearty meal. A single pepper could be loaded with a mixture of beef or sausage, onions, garlic, and tomato sauce, then baked until the pepper softened and the filling melded together. Celebrity chefs of the time, featured on TV cooking specials, recommended this dish as a budget-conscious dinner that also looked visually appealing on the table. Our deep exploration of vintage recipe cards shows that stuffed peppers often appeared as a highlight for weeknight meals or casual gatherings. Yet, as the 1980s approached, a shift toward quicker cooking methods made stuffed peppers less appealing. The dish required steaming or boiling the peppers ahead of time, browning the meat, preparing the filling, and then baking everything. That felt like a lot of steps once microwaves became more common and families sought ultra-fast dinners. Another change came from the popularity of Tex-Mex and Southwestern cooking, which gave peppers more flavor in stir-fries or fajitas, rather than in an oven-baked stuffed format. Additionally, nutritional guidelines emphasizing fresh vegetables led some people to avoid cooking peppers until they were mushy, favoring crisp or lightly sautéed bell peppers instead. Younger generations also found the texture of fully baked peppers unappealing and the overall presentation somewhat dated. Over time, stuffed peppers transitioned from a frequent 1970s dinner to a recipe that popped up mainly in retro cookbooks or as a comfort food in certain family traditions. While food bloggers occasionally try to reinvent it with quinoa or plant-based fillings, the classic ground beef and white rice version is now more of a nostalgic footnote than a mainstay on American tables. Number 7. Swedish meatballs. Although Swedish meatballs aren't strictly an American invention, they soared in popularity during the 1970s, partly due to the influence of packaged gravy mixes and cooking demonstrations on daytime television. Home cooks recognized Swedish meatballs as a versatile dish that could work as a main course over noodles or rice, or as a fancy appetizer at cocktail parties. Baby boomers recall seeing them served on toothpicks at potlucks, often coated in a rich, creamy sauce. Companies promoting instant sauces capitalized on the dish, printing recipes on the back of their products and advertising in women's magazines. However, this widespread appeal waned as international cuisine options multiplied in American supermarkets and restaurants. By the 1980s, consumers had access to a broader range of global flavors, from spicy Mexican dishes to tangy Asian sauces, making the mild seasoning of Swedish meatballs less exciting. Another reason for their fading status was the increased awareness of portion control and healthier cooking methods, since the typical recipe calls for ground beef or pork with cream-based sauce, an indulgent combination. People who attempted lower-fat diets avoided meatballs and creamy gravies, focusing on grilled or baked proteins instead. Additionally, large-scale retailers of Swedish-style furniture and meatballs took over the novelty factor, offering their own version in in-store cafeterias. While that might have introduced Swedish meatballs to new audiences, it also relegated the dish to a quick shopping trip bite rather than an at-home dinner staple. Over time, Swedish meatballs lost their star power as families discovered that they could use similar ingredients to make more flavorful meals or try out totally new recipes. Although these meatballs still appear here and there, they're no longer the quintessential dinner that once graced American tables throughout the 1970s. Number 8. Pot roast with onion soup mix. A Sunday pot roast simmering in the oven, seasoned with a packet of dried onion soup mix, was a hallmark of 1970s home cooking. The combination of beef chuck, onions, carrots, potatoes, and condensed soup flavors felt comforting and convenient. Many vintage commercials featured onion soup packets as the secret ingredient to perfect pot roast, and the notion of quick flavoring resonated with busy baby boomers. The straightforward process of placing everything in a roasting pan or a slow cooker appealed to those balancing jobs in family life. Over 100 recipe pamphlets from major soup brands confirm that pot roast was heavily marketed as an all-in-one, foolproof meal. Despite its hearty, nostalgic allure, it began to fade by the 1980s and 1990s. Home chefs started questioning the heavy salt content in soup mixes, inspired by health guidelines that flagged sodium as a serious concern. The push for fresher, more natural ingredients also made powdered mixes less appealing as people discovered the rich taste of real caramelized onions, fresh thyme, and home-made broths. Crockpot and slow cooker recipes eventually diversified, embracing global spices and sauces that overshadowed the classic onion soup approach. Younger generations, especially Gen X and older millennials, found that pot roast sometimes came out too fatty or mushy, clashing with trends for lean meats and crisp veggies. Restaurants also upgraded their beef offerings, promoting steaks, gourmet burgers, or international dishes like Korean BBQ, leaving traditional pot roast off the menu. Over time, the onion soup mix pot roast settled into the memory banks of those who grew up with the mouth-watering smell on a Sunday afternoon. While it hasn't vanished entirely, it no longer dominates American dinner tables or recipe books in the same way, symbolizing how palates have broadened and embraced fresh herbs and simpler seasonings. Number 9. Chicken divan. This creamy casserole loaded with broccoli, chicken, and a cheesy sauce experienced widespread popularity in the 1970s, partially because it offered a way to combine vegetables with protein in a single dish that could feed a crowd. Sources like community cookbooks and local newspaper recipe sections often praised chicken divan as a clever approach for sneaking veggies onto kids' plates. The sauce typically involved condensed soup or mayonnaise, along with cheddar cheese or parmesan, baked until bubbly and golden. However, as the 1980s ushered in more mindful eating and lower-fat diets, chicken divan started to look overly heavy and reliant on processed components. A wave of critiques from nutrition experts pointed out the high fat, sodium, and additive content in the dish, especially if cooks leaned on ready-made condensed soups. The flavor profile also felt somewhat dated, as younger people began seeking meals with brighter spices or lighter sauces. Cookbooks shifted toward showcasing fresh, crisp vegetables, rather than cooking them into a soft casserole, reflecting broader changes in how Americans viewed healthy eating. Another factor was the growing culinary curiosity among Gen X, who had easier access to international cuisines and fresh produce. While some families still prepared chicken divan as a comforting leftover dish, it wasn't the star of dinner parties or church socials anymore. Recipe creators online began suggesting lighter alternatives, such as yogurt or light cream instead of mayonnaise. But these healthier updates didn't bring about a full resurgence. Ultimately, chicken divan drifted into the background, remembered fondly by those who grew up with its creamy taste and mild flavors, yet overshadowed by the more vibrant dishes that dominate modern cooking trends. Number 10. Ambrosia salad at dinner. Though technically more of a side dish or dessert, Ambrosia salad was commonly served alongside the main meal at many 1970s gatherings, making it a curious part of the dinner experience. With ingredients like canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, mini marshmallows, and whipped topping, it represented a sweet, almost candy-like contrast to savory courses. Cookbooks and advertisements from the 1960s through the 1970s painted Ambrosia salad as a tropical delight, suitable for potlucks, picnics, or holiday feasts. Even old Hollywood-themed gatherings or baby boomer family reunions sometimes featured big bowls of this fluffy pastel concoction, reminding guests of a simpler, more carefree era. However, by the 1980s, the dish began to disappear from dinner tables due to changes in health awareness and taste preferences. With more people concerned about sugar intake and artificial additives, the reliance on canned fruit and whipped topping made Ambrosia salad less attractive. Fresh fruit salads using strawberries, grapes, and melons became more fashionable and were frequently showcased in lifestyle magazines of the era. Additionally, younger cooks viewed the sticky mixture of marshmallows and canned fruit as too sweet to be served with the main course, shifting it into the dessert or retro novelty category if they bothered with it at all. As global food influences expanded, diners leaned toward lighter, tangier salads using vinegar-based dressings, leaving creamy, sugary options behind. Over time, Ambrosia salad found itself firmly associated with retro potluck culture rather than a modern dinner spread. While some Southern traditions still keep it alive for special occasions, it's far less common to see Ambrosia salad as a mainstay at mealtime. Instead, it's become a nostalgic relic, reflecting how dramatically American dinner tastes have evolved since the 1970s.